Her fiancé left her for being fat, but she married his billionaire boss instead. And what was meant to be a thing of humiliation turned out to be a moment of honor. The champagne glass slipped from Maya's trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the bridal suite, just as her world did the same. I can't do this anymore, Maya. Look at yourself, really look. Derek's words cut deeper than the crystal shards at her feet. What would you do if someone you loved said this to you on your wedding day? Share your thoughts below. Your story might help someone else. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you so much for sticking around with me. I truly appreciate your love and support. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Maya Chun had always believed that love meant acceptance. Standing in her wedding dress, size 16, ivory silk that her mother had called flattering for your figure, she stared at her reflection in the floor-length mirror of the bridal suite at the Grandview Hotel. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant updo, small pearls catching the afternoon light. She was beautiful, even if the world constantly reminded her she wasn't thin enough to be considered traditionally so. You look radiant, whispered her maid of honor Jessica, adjusting the train of Maya's dress. But Maya could see the worry lines creasing Jessica's forehead, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Where is he? Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek should have been here 20 minutes ago for their first look photos. They'd planned every detail of this moment for 8 months. Jessica's phone buzzed. Her face went pale as she read the message. What is it? He's asking to speak with you. Alone. Before the ceremony. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't part of the plan. Derek was methodical, structured, the kind of man who color-coded his calendar and meal prepped every Sunday. Spontaneity made him anxious. The door opened, and Derek stepped inside, still in his casual clothes, jeans and a polo shirt. Not his tuxedo. Maya's stomach dropped. Maya, we need to talk. His voice was cold, distant. This wasn't the man who'd proposed to her at Christmas, who'd whispered, I love you exactly as you are when she'd worried about the engagement photos. Derek? What's wrong? The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. He closed the door behind him, shutting out Jessica's concerned face. When he turned back to Maya, his expression was that of a stranger. I've been thinking. Really thinking. About us. About this. He gestured vaguely at her dress, at her. About what? The words came out as a breath. You've gained weight since we got engaged. A lot of weight. Each word was a dagger. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it didn't matter, but Maya, I can't pretend anymore. The room spun. Derek, I'm the same person you. No, you're not. His voice rose. The woman I proposed to was different. She cared about her health, her appearance. She respected herself enough to. To what? To starve myself. Maya's voice cracked. I'm a size 16, Derek. I've always been curvy. You said you loved. I lied. The words hit her like a physical blow. I thought I could live with it. I thought maybe you'd change after we got married. But looking at you now in that dress, knowing everyone will be staring at us, at you. I can't do this anymore, Maya. Look at yourself, really look. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers then, the sound of shattering crystal mixing with the sound of her heart breaking. 3 floors below, in the hotel's executive conference room. Alexander Blackwood had built his empire by reading people, by seeing what others missed. At 38, he commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents, his steel-gray eyes and impeccable suits serving as armor against a world that had taught him early that vulnerability was weakness. He hadn't planned to be at the Grandview Hotel today. The quarterly reports could have waited until Monday, but something about Derek Morrison's smug confidence during Friday's presentation had left a bitter taste in his mouth. Derek was competent enough, a decent financial analyst, but there was something hollow about him, something that reminded Alexander uncomfortably of his own father. Sir. His assistant, Marcus, appeared in the doorway. The hotel staff mentioned there's a wedding on the 5th floor. Should we relocate to avoid any disruption? Alexander glanced at his watch. We'll be finished in an hour. Let them celebrate. But as he reviewed Morrison's projections, Alexander found his concentration fractured. Through the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the hotel's wedding garden below, white chairs arranged in perfect rows, flowers creating an archway that spoke of dreams and promises. He'd never believed in fairy tales. His parents' marriage had taught him that love was transactional, conditional, temporary. Yet something about the scene below stirred an unexpected longing he'd spent decades burying. His phone buzzed. A text from Morrison: "Need to handle something personal. Won't be in Monday morning. Thanks for understanding." Alexander frowned. Morrison had been scheduled to present the quarterly analysis first thing Monday. This was highly unprofessional, even for him. A commotion in the hallway caught his attention. Raised voices, crying, the rapid staccato of high heels on marble. Alexander rose from his chair, an inexplicable unease settling in his chest. Through the slightly open door, he glimpsed a flash of ivory fabric, a woman in a wedding dress rushing toward the elevator, her face hidden behind her hands. Behind her, a man in casual clothes called out, "Maya, be reasonable about this." Something cold and familiar twisted in Alexander's stomach. He'd heard that tone before, dismissive, cruel, designed to make someone feel small. His father had perfected it. Without fully understanding why, Alexander stepped into the hallway just as the elevator doors closed on the woman in white. Morrison stood there, straightening his shirt, looking irritated rather than heartbroken. "Morrison." Alexander's voice cut through the hallway noise like a blade. Derek spun around, his face cycling through surprise, embarrassment, and forced professionalism. "Mr. Blackwood. I didn't realize you were here today." Evidently. Alexander's gaze was arctic. "Having some difficulties?" Derek's laugh was hollow. "Nothing I can't handle. Just some pre-wedding jitters, you know how it is." But Alexander did know. He knew the difference between nerves and cruelty, between fear and selfishness. And something about the woman's posture as she'd fled, the way she'd held herself like she was trying to disappear, ignited a protective fury he hadn't felt in years. "The wedding is off, I take it?" "For the best, really. We weren't compatible." Derek's casual shrug made Alexander's hands clench into fists. In that moment, staring at his employee's callous indifference, Alexander made a decision that would change everything. What do you think Alexander should do next? Should he get involved, or stay out of Derek's personal business? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Alexander didn't make impulsive decisions. Every move in his life had been calculated, measured, strategic. But watching Derek Morrison shrug off what was clearly another person's devastation triggered something primal in him, a memory of his mother's quiet tears, of his own childhood helplessness in the face of casual cruelty. "Where is she?" The question left his lips before he could stop it. Derek blinked. "I'm sorry." "The woman. Your former fiancé. Where did she go?" "I don't see how that's relevant to Morrison." Alexander's voice dropped to the tone that made seasoned executives sweat. "Answer the question." Derek's Adam's apple bobbed. "Probably the parking garage. Her car's on level B2. Look, Mr. Blackwood, this is really a personal matter." Alexander was already moving toward the elevator, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble with military precision. Behind him, Derek called out something about Monday's presentation, about explaining everything, but Alexander's focus had narrowed to a single point: finding her. The parking garage was a concrete tomb, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows between the rows of cars. Alexander's footsteps echoed as he searched, guided by instinct more than logic. He found her in the farthest corner, sitting on the cold concrete beside a modest Honda Civic, her wedding dress pooled around her like spilled cream. She wasn't crying. Somehow, that made it worse. Maya heard the footsteps but didn't look up. She'd managed to hold herself together through the elevator ride, through the walk to her car, through the moment when she'd realized she couldn't drive. Not like this, not with her hands shaking and her vision blurred by unshed tears. "Maya." The voice was unfamiliar, deep, careful, unexpectedly gentle. She looked up to see a man in an expensive charcoal suit, his dark hair slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it. He was tall, probably 6'2", with a kind of presence that commanded attention even in a parking garage. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray like storm clouds, and filled with something she couldn't quite name. I'm sorry, do I know you? Her voice sounded hollow, foreign to her own ears. Alexander Blackwood. He didn't move closer, respecting her space. I work with Derek. I saw you leave and I. He paused, seeming to struggle with words. I wanted to make sure you were all right. Maya almost laughed. All right? She was sitting on a parking garage floor in a wedding dress that had cost 3 months' salary, abandoned by the man who'd promised to love her forever, humiliated in front of everyone who mattered to her. I'm fantastic, she said, surprised by the bitter edge in her voice. Never been better. Alexander studied her face in the harsh fluorescent light. Even devastated, even with mascara smudged beneath her eyes, she was striking. Not conventionally beautiful by magazine standards perhaps, but there was something luminous about her, something that made him want to know her story. May I? He gestured to the concrete beside her. Maya shrugged. What did it matter now? Free country. He lowered himself to sit beside her, his expensive suit surely suffering damage from the rough concrete. The gesture struck her as unexpectedly kind. They sat in silence for a moment, the parking garage quiet except for the distant hum of traffic above. I heard what he said to you, Alexander said finally. Maya's cheeks burned. Which part? The part where he called me fat, or the part where he said he'd been lying about loving me for 8 months? All of it. His voice was quiet but steady. And for what it's worth, he's an idiot. Is he though? Maya pulled at a loose thread on her dress. Maybe he's just honest. Maybe everyone else has been lying to me my whole life, telling me I'm beautiful when I'm not, that someone could love me when they can't. Alexander turned to look at her fully. Do you really believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore. The words came out as a whisper. I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought if someone stayed with you, chose you, wanted to marry you, that meant you were enough. But maybe I was just convenient. Maybe he thought he could fix me after the wedding. Love isn't about fixing people, Alexander said, surprising himself with his conviction. It's about seeing them completely and choosing them anyway. Maya looked at him then, really looked. His profile was sharp in the fluorescent light, his jaw tense as if her pain was somehow causing him physical discomfort. You don't even know me, she said softly. No, he agreed. But I know Derek Morrison. I've worked with him for 2 years. He's calculating, shallow, image-obsessed. If he couldn't see your worth, that says everything about him and nothing about you. Something in his tone made Maya's breath catch. There was a rawness there, a personal understanding that went beyond polite sympathy. Why do you care? She asked. Why are you here, sitting on a dirty parking garage floor in your $1,000 suit, talking to a woman you've never met? Alexander was quiet for so long Maya thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because someone should have done the same for my mother. The simple statement hung between them, loaded with years of pain and regret. Maya felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the wall of devastation Derek had built around her heart. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. So am I. He stood, extending his hand to her. Come on. Let's get you out of here. Maya stared at his outstretched hand. Taking it felt significant somehow, like accepting more than just help standing up. Where? She asked. Somewhere that isn't here. Somewhere he can't find you. You shouldn't be alone right now. For the first time in hours, Maya felt something other than crushing despair. It was fragile, tentative, but it was hope. She took his hand. What do you think Maya should do? Should she trust this stranger who showed her kindness in her darkest moment? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the most unexpected encounters change our lives forever. Alexander's penthouse overlooked the city like a glass fortress, all clean lines and expensive silence. Maya stood in his living room, still in her wedding dress, feeling like an imposter in a museum. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd fled one uncomfortable situation only to find herself in another, though this discomfort felt different. Less like judgment, more like uncertainty. I shouldn't be here, she said, her voice small in the vast space. Alexander emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 steaming mugs. Tea, he said simply, offering her one. It's chamomile. My housekeeper swears it cures everything. Maya accepted the mug gratefully, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. Your housekeeper isn't here on a Saturday? I gave her the weekend off. He settled into an armchair across from her, careful to maintain distance. I value privacy. The word hung between them, loaded with implication. Privacy. What was she doing in a stranger's home? What would people think? Then she remembered, there was no wedding party wondering where she'd gone, no reception to worry about missing. Derek had made sure of that. I need to call Jessica, she said suddenly. My maid of honor. She's probably worried sick. Of course. Alexander gestured toward his phone on the marble coffee table. Take all the time you need. But when Maya picked up the phone, her hands started shaking again. How did you explain this? How did you tell your best friend that the man you'd loved, the man you'd planned a future with, had looked at you in your wedding dress and decided you weren't worth loving? I can't, she whispered, setting the phone down. I can't say the words out loud again. Alexander leaned forward slightly. Would you like me to call her? I could explain that you're safe but need some time. You don't even know her. I know how to deliver difficult news without unnecessary details. There was something in his tone that suggested experience with protecting people from harsh truths. Maya nodded gratefully. Alexander's conversation with Jessica was brief, professional, kind. He identified himself as a friend who was making sure Maya was safe, assured her that Maya would call when she was ready, and deflected Jessica's worried questions with practiced ease. She's on her way to handle the vendors, he said after hanging up. She sounds like a good friend. The best. Maya's voice cracked. She tried to warn me, actually. Last week, she said Derek had been different lately. Distant. Critical. I thought it was just pre-wedding stress. What kind of different? Maya set down her tea, her hands clenching in the silk of her dress. Little comments. About my eating habits, my exercise routine. Suggestions about wedding dress alterations that would be more flattering. I told myself he was just nervous, that he wanted everything to be perfect for our big day. But you were hurt. I was confused. The man who proposed to me never cared about any of that. He used to bring me ice cream when I had bad days, tell me I was beautiful when I felt invisible. Her laugh was bitter. I guess that man never really existed. Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. He recognized the signs, the self-doubt, the rewriting of history to accommodate cruelty. He'd watched his mother do the same thing for years, explaining away his father's increasing coldness, making excuses for behavior that had no excuse. Or maybe, he said carefully, that man did exist, but he was weak. And instead of dealing with outside pressure or his own insecurities, he decided to make you the problem. Maya looked up sharply. Outside pressure? Alexander hesitated. He was treading on dangerous ground here, sharing information that might not be his to share. But the need to help her understand, to take some of the blame she was heaping on herself and redirect it where it belonged, was overwhelming. Derek's been up for a promotion, he said finally. Senior financial analyst. It comes with certain social expectations. Company events, client dinners, a particular image. The words hit Maya like ice water. Are you saying he left me because I wouldn't look good at corporate parties? I'm saying Derek Morrison is the kind of man who makes decisions based on how they'll appear to others rather than what's in his heart. If he even has one. Maya stood abruptly, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city below. The sun was setting, painting the glass towers in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere down there, guests were probably still gathered at the Grandview Hotel, confused and gossiping about the bride who never appeared. You don't understand, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Everyone's going to think there's something wrong with me. That I wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy of love. And maybe they're right. Maya. No, listen. She turned to face him, tears finally spilling over. I've been the fat girl my entire life. The one boys asked out on dares, the one who got invited to parties because I was funny, not because I was wanted. Derek was the first man who ever looked at me like I was beautiful. The first one who made me believe I could be someone's first choice instead of their last resort. Alexander stood slowly, something fierce and protective rising in his chest. Then he was the first of many, not the last of few. You can't know that. Can't I? He moved closer, Not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. Maya, I've spent my entire adult life in boardrooms full of men who think they can reduce people to profit margins and demographics. I've seen them dismiss brilliant ideas because they came from someone who didn't fit their narrow definition of valuable. Derek Morrison is exactly that kind of man. But what if he's right? What if I really am? What if you're what? Human? Real? Imperfect in ways that make you interesting instead of plastic. Alexander's voice was getting stronger, more passionate. What if you're exactly what someone's been looking for their entire life, and Derek was just too shallow to recognize a gift when he had one? Maya stared at him, something shifting in her expression. Why are you being so kind to me? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities neither was quite ready to examine. Alexander took a step back, his walls slamming back into place. Because it's the right thing to do, he said, his voice carefully neutral again. Because no one should face humiliation alone. But even as he said the words, they both knew there was more to it than simple human decency. There was something happening in the space between them, something that scared them both. Maya wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how surreal this entire situation was. I should go home. This is too much. Maya. No, really. This has been incredibly kind, but I need to process this alone. I need to figure out what comes next. Alexander wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that going home to an empty apartment full of wedding gifts and shared memories was the worst possible idea. But he could see the fear in her eyes, not fear of Derek, but fear of whatever was building between them in the midst of her devastation. I'll drive you, he said simply. You don't have to. I'm driving you home, Maya. It's not negotiable. For a moment, she looked like she might argue. Then her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, and she nodded. Neither of them spoke during the elevator ride down to the parking garage. Neither acknowledged the way their hands almost touched when he helped her into his car, or the way she shivered when he draped his jacket over her shoulders. But they both felt it, the pull, the connection, the terrifying possibility that sometimes the worst day of your life could also be the beginning of something extraordinary. Do you think Maya is making the right choice by going home alone? Sometimes we need space to heal, but sometimes we need someone to remind us we're not alone. What would you do in her situation? Let me know in the comments. Maya's apartment felt like a crime scene. Wedding gifts stacked in corners, her wedding planner spread across the dining table, Derek's things scattered throughout, his coffee mug in the sink, his laptop charger snaked across the floor, his spare shirts hanging in her closet like ghosts of a future that would never exist. She made it exactly 47 minutes before the walls started closing in. The first panic attack hit while she was staring at the framed photo on her nightstand. Her and Derek at Christmas, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera. Had he been pretending even then? She grabbed the frame and hurled it across the room, the glass shattering against the wall. Then came the hyperventilating. Jessica found her 2 hours later, curled up on the bathroom floor in her wedding dress, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Oh, honey. Jessica knelt beside her, gathering Maya into her arms. Breathe with me. In for 4, out for 4. That's it. When Maya could finally speak, her voice was raw. I can't stay here, Jess. Everything reminds me of him. Of us. Of how stupid I was to believe. Stop. Jessica's voice was firm. You weren't stupid. You were in love. There's a difference. Where am I supposed to go? I can't afford a hotel indefinitely, and I can't ask my parents to. You're coming home with me. Your apartment is tiny. You don't have space for. Maya Elizabeth Chun, you're not sleeping in this apartment tonight surrounded by reminders of that worthless man. Pack a bag. Now. But Jessica's studio apartment was barely big enough for one person, let alone two. They lasted 3 days before Maya's guilt became unbearable. I'm going to a hotel, she announced Wednesday morning, watching Jessica try to get ready for work in the tiny space while Maya sat on the pull-out couch that served as Jessica's dining table. You can't afford that long-term. I'll figure something out. Maybe I can sublease this place, find something smaller. Maya, you're not thinking clearly. You're making decisions based on panic, not logic. Maya knew Jessica was right, but logic felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop, concerned friends, confused family members, Derek's attempts to talk things through rationally. She turned it off after the fifth voicemail from her mother asking what she was supposed to tell Aunt Helen about the wedding. That's when Alexander's business card fell out of her purse. She'd forgotten he'd given it to her before leaving his penthouse, pressing it into her hand with the simple words, "If you need anything." She'd assumed it was empty politeness, the kind of thing people said but didn't mean. But staring at the elegant black cardstock with its embossed lettering, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in days: possibility. "I might have another option," she said slowly. Alexander's phone rang at 2:47 p.m. on Wednesday. He was in the middle of a merger negotiation that would determine the fate of 300 jobs, but when he saw Maya's name on the caller ID, everything else became background noise. "Maya? Are you all right?" Her voice was small, hesitant. "I'm sorry to bother you. I know you must be busy." "You're not bothering me." He stepped out of the conference room, ignoring the surprised looks from his legal team. "What's wrong?" "I was wondering, you mentioned you had a housekeeper who was off for the weekend. Does that mean you have extra space? I mean, not that I'm assuming anything, but I can't stay at my apartment, and Jessica's place is too small, and I don't know anyone else in the city well enough to." "Maya." His voice was gentle but firm. "Stop apologizing. Of course you can stay here. I can pay rent. I have savings, and I'll be looking for a new place, so it would just be temporary. We'll figure out the details later. Can you be here in an hour?" The relief in her voice was palpable. "Thank you, Alexander, I can't tell you how much this means." "1 hour," he repeated, already calculating how to rearrange his schedule. "I'll have Marcus send a car. I can take the subway." 1 hour, Maya. After hanging up, Alexander stood in the hallway for longer than was professionally acceptable, staring at his phone. He was making a mistake. He knew it with the same certainty he knew market trends and corporate vulnerabilities. Inviting Maya to stay in his home was crossing a line he'd never crossed before, mixing personal and professional, letting someone into his carefully controlled space. But the alternative, imagining her alone in that apartment surrounded by reminders of Derek's cruelty, or cramped in her friend's tiny studio drowning in guilt, was unacceptable. He returned to the conference room, where 12 lawyers were waiting with varying degrees of impatience. "Gentlemen," he said, gathering his papers, "we'll resume tomorrow morning. I have something more important to handle." Maya arrived at Alexander's building with 2 suitcases and enough emotional baggage to sink a ship. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt endless, her reflection in the polished steel doors showing a woman she barely recognized, hollow-eyed, thin-lipped, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of designer confidence. Alexander answered the door before she could knock, as if he'd been waiting by the window. "How did you?" Building security called up. He reached for her suitcases without ceremony. "How are you holding up?" It was such a simple question, but something about the way he asked it, like he actually wanted to know, like her answer mattered, made Maya's carefully constructed composure crack. "I keep waiting for it to stop hurting," she said, following him into the living room. "Everyone says it will get easier, but right now it feels like someone scooped out my insides with a rusty spoon." Alexander set her suitcases down and turned to face her fully. "How long were you together?" 2 years. Engaged for 8 months. She sank onto his couch, the same spot she'd occupied 3 days ago. "I know that's not very long in the grand scheme of things, but he was my first real relationship. My first everything, really." Something dark flickered across Alexander's expression. "Your first." Maya's cheeks burned. "I was a late bloomer. Focused on school, then work, then Derek came along and made me feel like maybe I wasn't as invisible as I'd always thought." Alexander sat across from her, his jaw tight. "Maya, you need to understand something. What Derek did to you wasn't about love or attraction or any of the things you think it was about. It was about control. About having someone who would be grateful enough to accept whatever scraps of affection he was willing to offer." "That's not." "It is." His voice was harder now, edged with something that sounded like personal experience. "Men like Derek seek out women who don't know their own worth because they're easier to manipulate. They build you up just enough to make you dependent, then tear you down when it's convenient." Maya stared at him. "You sound like you've seen this before." "I have. Up close." Alexander stood abruptly, moving to the window. My father was a master at it. Charming, successful, the kind of man other men admired and women envied my mother for marrying. Behind closed doors, he spent 20 years convincing her she was lucky he'd chosen her, that no one else would want damaged goods. Alexander. She believed him. Even after the divorce, even after he'd moved on to wife number 2, she believed she was fundamentally unworthy of love. He turned back to Maya, his eyes fierce. I will not watch another good woman destroy herself because some pathetic excuse for a man couldn't recognize what he had. The room fell silent except for the city humming 20 floors below them. Maya felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea or the expensive heating system. Is that what this is? She asked softly. You saving me because you couldn't save her? Alexander's expression went carefully blank. This is me offering temporary housing to someone in need. Nothing more. But they both knew he was lying. Just like they both knew that whatever was happening between them was dangerous, complicated, and absolutely unavoidable. The guest room is down the hall, Alexander said, his voice professionally neutral again. You'll have your own bathroom, complete privacy. Mrs. Chun comes in on weekdays to clean and stock the kitchen, but weekends are quiet. Mrs. Chen? That's convenient. Coincidence. She's been with me for 3 years. He paused. Maya, I want you to know, whatever happens, however long you need to stay, you're safe here. Derek Morrison will never set foot in this building. The promise in his voice made Maya's breath catch. When was the last time someone had offered to protect her? When had anyone made her feel like she was worth protecting? Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Alexander said, but there was something almost like a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You haven't met Mrs. Chun. She's going to have opinions about our living arrangement. For the first time in days, Maya felt something that might have been the beginning of a laugh. It was small, fragile, but it was real. Maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she needed to be. What do you think about Maya's decision to stay with Alexander? Is it smart to rely on someone she barely knows, or sometimes do we need to trust our instincts about who's safe? Share your thoughts. Your perspective might help someone else going through a difficult time. Maya had been living in Alexander's penthouse for 4 days when she found the photograph. She hadn't meant to snoop. Mrs. Chun, who had indeed had opinions about the young lady staying in Mr. Alexander's guest room, but had warmed to Maya after discovering she could make proper dumplings, had asked her to retrieve a serving platter from Alexander's study while he was at work. The photograph was face down on his desk, partially hidden beneath a stack of financial reports. Maya wouldn't have noticed it at all if the corner hadn't caught the light from his desk lamp. Without thinking, she turned it over. The woman in the photo was beautiful in the way that made Maya's chest tighten with familiar inadequacy, blonde, delicate, with a kind of bone structure that belonged in magazines. She was laughing at something off camera, her hand resting on the arm of a younger version of Alexander. He looked maybe 25, his face softer somehow, more open. Happy. Her name was Catherine. Maya spun around, the photograph slipping from her fingers. Alexander stood in the doorway of his study, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, I wasn't. Mrs. Chen asked me to get a platter, and I saw. It's fine. He moved into the room, picking up the photograph from where it had fallen. For a moment, he just stared at it. She was my fiancé. A long time ago. Maya felt something twist in her stomach. What happened? Alexander was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he set the photo back on his desk, this time face up. She left me for someone else. Someone who could give her the life she really wanted. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but Maya didn't know what else to say. Don't be. She was honest, at least. More honest than I was. What do you mean? Alexander moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. I was 26, fresh out of Harvard Business School, working 18-hour days trying to prove myself worthy of my father's empire. Catherine was an acquisition. Beautiful, well-connected, from the right family. She checked all the boxes. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. You didn't love her? I thought I did. Or maybe I loved the idea of her, the way she looked on my arm at company functions, the way other men envied me for having her. His voice was flat, clinical. I proposed because it made sense, because my father approved, because it was the next logical step in building the perfect life. But she was smarter than I gave her credit for. She saw through me before I saw through myself. Alexander turned back to Maya, something raw in his expression. 3 weeks before our wedding, she told me she couldn't marry a man who was in love with his own ambition more than he was with her. She said I was just like my father, cold, calculating, incapable of real intimacy. Maya's heart clenched. That's not true. Isn't it? His laugh was bitter. I spent the next 12 years proving her right. Building walls, keeping people at arm's length, treating relationships like business transactions. I told myself it was better that way, safer. That emotional detachment was a strength, not a flaw. Then why did you help me? The question hung between them like a challenge. Alexander stared at her, this woman who had somehow slipped past every defense he'd spent years constructing, who made him want to be better than he'd ever thought possible. Because, he said slowly, watching Derek Morrison treat you like you were disposable reminded me of every cruel thing I'd ever done in the name of logic. And I couldn't stand the thought of becoming him. Maya moved closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. You're nothing like Derek. How can you be so sure? Because Derek saw my flaws as defects to be fixed. You see them as part of who I am. She was close enough now to see the storm in his gray eyes. Because when I was broken on that parking garage floor, you didn't try to put me back together the way you thought I should be. You just sat with me in the mess. Alexander's breath caught. Maya. I found something else in your desk, she said softly, while I was looking for the platter. His face went carefully blank. What? Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that held engagement rings. This was in the top drawer. Catherine's. Alexander's jaw tightened. I should have thrown it away years ago. Why didn't you? Because every time I looked at it, it reminded me why I couldn't trust myself to love someone properly. Why I needed to stay alone. Maya opened the box, revealing a flawless solitaire diamond that caught the afternoon light like captured starfire. It was beautiful, elegant, expensive, everything a ring should be. It was also completely wrong for her. It's stunning, she said, and meant it. It cost more than most people's cars. That's not what makes it beautiful. Maya closed the box gently, holding it out to him. What makes it beautiful is that you chose it for someone you wanted to spend your life with. Even if it didn't work out, even if you both realized you weren't right for each other, the intention was pure. Alexander stared at the box like it might explode. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe Catherine was right about timing, but wrong about your capacity to love. Maybe you weren't ready then, but that doesn't mean you can't be ready now. The silence stretched between them, loaded with possibility and fear in equal measure. Alexander took the ring box from her hands, their fingers brushing for just a moment. What if I hurt you? He asked quietly. What if I'm everything she said I was? Maya stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. What if you're not? What if we're both exactly what the other person needs, and we're too scared to find out? Maya. Her name was a whisper, a prayer, a surrender. I know this is complicated. I know I'm emotionally devastated and you're my landlord and my ex-fiancé works for you. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is a terrible idea. But I've spent my entire life playing it safe, settling for less than I deserved because I was afraid to want more. And look where it got me. She reached up, her palm resting against his cheek. Maybe it's time to be brave. Alexander closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starved for affection. When he opened them again, the careful control he'd maintained for 4 days was gone, replaced by something fierce and hungry and real. This changes everything, he said. I know. If we do this, there's no going back. No pretending it's just about helping someone in need. I know. Alexander's hands found her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. I don't know how to do this, Maya. I don't know how to love someone without destroying them. Then we'll figure it out together. And when he kissed her, soft and desperate and full of 12 years of loneliness, Maya finally understood what people meant when they talked about coming home. The kiss changed everything and nothing all at once. Maya woke up the next morning in the guest room, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, the memory of Alexander's lips on hers feeling like something she might have dreamed. But when she padded to the kitchen in her pajamas, an old college t-shirt and flannel pants that had seen better days, she found him at the granite island, fully dressed for work, reading something on his tablet with a kind of intense focus she was beginning to recognize as his default mode. He looked up when she entered, and the careful distance in his eyes made her stomach drop. "Good morning," he said politely. "Mrs. Chun left fresh coffee. Help yourself." Maya poured herself a mug, acutely aware of how domestic this felt, how wrong she'd been to think one kiss could bridge the gap between his carefully controlled world and her emotional chaos. "Alexander, about last night. Was a mistake." His voice was crisp, professional. "I took advantage of a vulnerable moment. It won't happen again." The words hit her like cold water. Took advantage? I was the one who. "You're dealing with trauma, Maya. The last thing you need is more complications." He closed his tablet with a decisive snap. "I have meetings all day. Mrs. Chun will be here if you need anything." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone with her coffee and the growing certainty that she'd just experienced the most perfect kiss of her life, followed immediately by the most brutal rejection. For 3 days, they danced around each other like polite strangers. Alexander left early and came home late. Maya threw herself into job hunting and apartment searching, determined to prove she could rebuild her life without depending on anyone. They spoke only when necessary. "How was your day?" "Fine, thank you." "More coffee?" "Please." It was driving them both quietly insane. Mrs. Chun, who had raised 4 children and possessed the supernatural ability to sense romantic tension from 3 rooms away, finally intervened on Thursday morning. "Mr. Alexander," she announced, bustling into his study where he was trying to work from home. "You look terrible." Alexander glanced up from his laptop. "Thank you, Mrs. Chun. Your honesty is always refreshing. Don't be smart with me. When did you last eat a real meal?" "I had coffee this morning." "Coffee is not food." She planted her hands on her hips, a tiny woman wielding authority like a weapon. "And when did you last sleep more than 4 hours?" Alexander rubbed his temples where a headache had been building for days. "I've been busy." "You've been stupid." Mrs. Chun moved to his window, opening the blinds he'd kept closed all morning. "That sweet girl is in your guest room crying herself to sleep every night, and you're in here pretending you don't care. Both of you acting like fools." "Mrs. Chun." "No. You listen." She turned to face him, her expression fierce. "I worked for your father for 10 years before I came to you. I watched him destroy everything good in his life because he was too proud to admit he needed people. You want to end up like him? Alone and bitter and convinced that money is better than love." The comparison hit Alexander like a physical blow. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" "Because that girl isn't asking you to save her. She's asking you to stop running from the one good thing that's happened to either of you in years." Mrs. Chun left him sitting there, staring out at the city and wondering when his life had become so complicated that his housekeeper was giving him relationship advice. Maya was in the kitchen that evening, attempting to cook dinner as a peace offering, when Alexander finally came home. She'd found ingredients for his mother's beef stew recipe. Mrs. Chun had shared it after Maya had mentioned wanting to do something nice for him. "You don't have to cook," Alexander said from the doorway, his tie already loosened, his hair mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. "I wanted to." Maya didn't turn around, focusing on stirring the pot. "Mrs. Chun said this was your favorite." "It was." His voice was softer now. "My mother used to make it when I was sick, or when my father was being particularly difficult." She sounds like she was a good mother. She was. She deserved better than she got. Maya finally turned to face him, her heart clenching at the exhaustion in his eyes. "Alexander, we need to talk." "I know." He moved into the kitchen, leaning against the counter but maintaining careful distance. "Maya, I owe you an apology. The way I handled things the other morning was cruel." "You were scared." "That's not an excuse." "No, but it's human." She turned off the burner and faced him fully. "I've been thinking about what you said, about taking advantage of a vulnerable moment. And you're right, I am vulnerable. I'm probably going to be vulnerable for a while. But that doesn't mean I don't know my own mind. Alexander's hands clenched at his sides. Maya. I'm not Catherine. The words came out stronger than she'd intended. I'm not going to leave you because you work too much or because you struggle with intimacy. I'm not looking for you to be perfect. What are you looking for? Maya moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. I'm looking for someone who sees me. Really sees me. Not a project to fix or an image to maintain, but me. Messy, complicated, emotional me. And if I can't give you that? If I'm too damaged, too set in my ways, then we'll figure it out together. Or we won't, and we'll part as friends who helped each other through difficult times. But Alexander, I can't keep living in this limbo where we pretend there's nothing between us. Alexander stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You want honesty? Always. I've been terrified since the moment I met you. Not of you, but of how you make me feel. Like maybe I'm not as broken as I thought I was. Like maybe I'm capable of more than I believed. Maya's breath caught. That terrifies you? It should terrify you too. I don't know how to do this, Maya. I don't know how to be someone's person without losing myself in the process. Maybe that's the point. She reached for his hands, intertwining their fingers. Maybe love isn't about losing yourself. Maybe it's about finding out who you really are when someone else believes in your potential. Alexander brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. You make me want to be better than I am. You make me believe I'm worth more than I thought I was. They stood there in his kitchen, hands linked, the smell of beef stew filling the air, and for the first time in years, Alexander felt something that might have been peace. So what do we do now? He asked. Maya smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since that day in the parking garage. Now we eat dinner. We talk. We figure out one day at a time how to build something real together. And Derek? The complications will work themselves out. Or they won't, and we'll handle whatever comes. She squeezed his hands. Alexander, I'm not asking for promises or guarantees. I'm just asking for a chance. Alexander studied her face. This woman who had somehow seen through every wall he'd built, who made him want to be brave for the first time in his adult life. Okay, he said simply. Okay. Okay, let's see what happens when two emotionally complicated people decide to trust each other. Maya laughed, the sound bright and genuine in the quiet kitchen. Fair warning, I'm going to need a lot of patience while I figure out how to believe in love again. Fair warning back, I'm going to need a lot of grace while I figure out how to love someone without trying to control the outcome. Deal. They sealed it with a kiss that tasted like possibility and hope, while Mrs. Chen's beef stew simmered on the stove and the city sparkled beyond the windows, full of promise and potential. For the first time since her wedding day, Maya felt like she was exactly where she belonged. What do you think about Maya and Alexander's decision to try building something real together? Sometimes the best relationships come from taking chances when we're scared. Have you ever had to choose between safety and possibility? Share your thoughts below. Your story might inspire someone else to be brave. Maya should have known the peace wouldn't last. She and Alexander had been living in their careful bubble of possibility for exactly 9 days when Derek Morrison decided to remind them both that some complications couldn't be wished away. Maya was in Alexander's kitchen on a Saturday morning, making pancakes while he read the financial section aloud. A domestic routine they'd fallen into that felt both natural and miraculous, when the building's concierge called up. Mr. Blackwood? There's a Derek Morrison here to see Ms. Chun. Says it's urgent. The newspaper crinkled in Alexander's grip. Maya felt all the blood drain from her face. Send him up, Alexander said, his voice carefully controlled. Alexander, no. It's fine. He can't avoid this conversation forever, and neither can you. But when Derek stepped off the elevator 5 minutes later, Maya realized how wrong they'd both been. Derek looked like hell, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing the same clothes he'd probably slept in. But it was the desperate energy radiating from him that made Maya's skin crawl. Maya, thank God. He rushed toward her like she was a life preserver. I've been looking everywhere for you. Your friend Jessica wouldn't tell me where you were staying. Because I asked her not to. Maya stepped back instinctively, bumping into Alexander, who had positioned himself slightly behind her, close enough to intervene if necessary. We need to talk. Alone. Derek's eyes flicked to Alexander with undisguised hostility. This is between us. Anything you need to say to Maya, you can say in front of me, Alexander said coolly. Derek's face twisted. Of course. The knight in shining armor routine. Very touching. He turned back to Maya, his expression shifting to what she now recognized as calculated vulnerability. Baby, I made a mistake. A huge, terrible mistake. I've been going crazy without you. Maya felt sick. Derek. I know what I said was unforgivable. I know I hurt you. But I was scared, Maya. Scared of how much I loved you, scared of making such a big commitment. Men do stupid things when they're scared. You called her fat on her wedding day, Alexander said quietly. That wasn't fear. That was cruelty. Stay out of this, Blackwood. Derek's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. Maya, please. Can we just talk privately? 5 minutes. No. The word came out stronger than Maya felt. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Derek's jaw tightened. Fine. You want an audience for this? Maya, I love you. I want to marry you. I want us to go back to how things were before I got stupid and scared. Before you got honest, you mean? Maya crossed her arms, surprised by her own steadiness. Derek, you didn't make a mistake. You told me exactly how you really felt about me. That's not true. You said you'd been lying about loving me for 8 months. You said you hoped I'd change after we got married. You looked at me in my wedding dress and decided I wasn't worth the embarrassment. Maya's voice was getting stronger with each word. That's not fear, Derek. That's who you really are. Derek's face went red. You think this is better? Living in sin with my boss? Playing house with a man who's using you to get back at me for some imagined slight? Derek. Alexander's voice carried a warning that made Derek take a step back. Oh, that's rich. The great Alexander Blackwood, pretending to be a white knight. Tell her, Alex. Tell her why you really brought her here. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. What is he talking about? Nothing, Alexander said, but there was something in his tone, a careful blankness that Maya was learning to recognize as his tell when he was hiding something. Derek laughed, the sound sharp and mean. He didn't tell you? About the promotion? About how he's been looking for an excuse to get rid of me for months. Derek, that's enough. I was up for senior financial analyst, Maya. The promotion I've been working toward for 2 years. And your new boyfriend here has been looking for any reason to pass me over. Derek's smile was vicious. What better reason than stealing my fiancé? 2 birds, 1 stone. Maya felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Alexander? Is that true? It's not what you think. Is Derek up for a promotion in your company? Alexander's hesitation was answer enough. Yes, but... And you've been considering not giving it to him? Maya, his job performance has nothing to do with this. With us. But Derek was already going in for the kill. Ask him when he decided not to promote me, Maya. Ask him if it was before or after he found you crying in that parking garage. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya stared at Alexander, searching his face for a denial that didn't come. Before, Alexander said finally. The decision was made before. But you didn't tell me. Maya's voice was barely a whisper. You let me believe this was about us. About helping someone in need. It was about us. Was it? Or was I just a convenient way to hurt Derek Morrison? The words tasted like poison in her mouth. All those things you said about him being calculating, about him using people, were you describing him or yourself? Maya, that's not fair. Fair. She laughed, the sound brittle and broken. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been telling me the truth from the beginning. Fair would have been letting me make an informed decision about whether I wanted to be a pawn in your corporate games. Derek stepped closer, sensing victory. You see? I told you he was using you. Come home with me, Maya. Let's fix this. Let's go back to how things were. Maya turned to stare at Derek like he'd grown a second head. Are you insane? You think because Alexander isn't perfect, I'm going to run back to you? You destroyed me, Derek. You took every insecurity I'd ever had and weaponized it against me. But he's no better. No, maybe he's not. Maybe they're both liars and manipulators. Maybe I'm just the world's worst judge of character. Maya grabbed her purse from the counter, her hands shaking with rage and hurt. But at least Alexander never told me I was too fat to love. Maya, where are you going? Alexander stepped toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. Away from both of you. I need to think. I need to figure out what's real and what's just another lie. Please don't leave. Let me explain. Explain what? That you've been lying to me for 2 weeks? That every kind thing you've done was motivated by spite toward Derek rather than actual care for me. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice was steady. I thought I'd found someone who saw my worth. Turns out I'm just another acquisition in your war with Derek Morrison. That's not true. But Maya was already heading for the elevator, leaving behind 2 men who had each claimed to love her while treating her like a prize to be won rather than a person to be cherished. For the second time in 2 weeks, Maya found herself fleeing from a man who had broken her heart. But this time, the betrayal cut deeper because she had allowed herself to believe in fairy tales and second chances. This time, she had only herself to blame for being stupid enough to trust again. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted had hidden motives? Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we thought were saving us. What do you think Maya should do now? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes we need outside perspective when our world falls apart. Maya sat in the 24-hour diner 6 blocks from Alexander's building, nursing her 3rd cup of coffee and staring at her phone. Jessica had called 4 times. Alexander had called 7. Derek had somehow gotten her number and called twice before she blocked him. She'd been there for 3 hours, watching the sun set through the greasy windows, surrounded by the comfortable anonymity of late-night shift workers and insomniacs. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and sensible shoes, had stopped asking if she wanted anything else and simply refilled her cup without comment. Maya's reflection in the black window showed a woman who looked older than her 28 years, worn down by betrayal and confusion. 2 weeks ago, she'd thought she understood her life. She was going to marry Derek, maybe have kids, live a predictable middle-class existence. Now she didn't know anything. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Alexander. I know you don't want to hear from me, but please come home so we can talk. You deserve the whole truth. Home. As if his penthouse had ever been her home. As if she belonged anywhere. Rough night, honey? Maya looked up to find the waitress standing beside her booth, coffee pot in hand. Rough couple of weeks, actually. Man trouble. Maya laughed bitterly. Is it that obvious? I've been serving coffee to heartbroken women for 23 years. You all have the same look. The waitress slid into the seat across from Maya without invitation. I'm Dolores. And before you ask, yes, I'm supposed to be working, but the owner's my nephew and the night crowd doesn't mind if I take a break to talk sense into someone who needs it. I'm not sure anyone can talk sense into this mess. Try me. And somehow, Maya found herself telling the whole story to a stranger in a diner. Derek's betrayal, Alexander's rescue, the growing feelings, the terrible revelation about Derek's promotion. Dolores listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic noises. So now I don't know what was real and what was just strategy, Maya finished. I don't know if Alexander actually cared about me or if I was just a convenient way to hurt Derek. Dolores was quiet for a moment, studying Maya's face. Can I ask you something? Sure. When this Alexander looked at you, really looked at you, how did it feel? Maya's chest tightened. Like I mattered. Like I was worth protecting. And when he touched you, kissed you, like coming home. The words slipped out before Maya could stop them. And when he talked to you about your ex, about Derek's treatment of you, what did you hear in his voice? Maya closed her eyes, remembering. Anger. Real anger. Like Derek's cruelty actually hurt him. Honey, let me ask you this. If Alexander was just using you to hurt Derek, why would he care so much about how Derek treated you? Why would your pain matter to him? Maya opened her eyes, staring at Dolores. I don't know. I do. Because a man who's playing games doesn't get genuinely angry about someone else's cruelty unless he actually cares about the person being hurt. Dolores reached across the table and patted Maya's hand. Look, I don't know this Alexander fellow, but I know men. And I know the difference between someone who's using you and someone who's scared of how much he cares about you. But he lied to me. Did he? Or did he just not tell you something that wasn't relevant until Derek made it relevant? Maya frowned. What do you mean? You said Alexander decided not to promote Derek before he ever met you. That means his professional judgment about Derek had nothing to do with you. Derek's the one who made it about you by showing up and trying to use it as ammunition. Maya felt something shift in her chest. But Alexander should have told me. Should he? Why? It was a business decision that had nothing to do with your relationship. The only reason it matters now is because Derek weaponized it. Dolores leaned forward. Honey, you said this Alexander spent 2 weeks taking care of you, making you feel safe, helping you heal. You think he's that good an actor? You think he could fake genuine care for 2 weeks straight just to spite an employee? I don't know anymore. Yes, you do. You're just scared to trust your own judgment because Derek spent 2 years making you doubt yourself. Dolores's voice was gentle but firm. What does your heart tell you about Alexander? Not your fear, not your hurt feelings about the Derek situation, your heart. Maya was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Alexander's hands shaking when he'd first kissed her. The way he talked about his mother, about Catherine, about his own fears of being unworthy of love. The careful way he'd respected her space, her healing process. The genuine fury in his voice when he talked about Derek's cruelty. My heart says he's a good man who's terrible at expressing his feelings and probably should have handled things differently, but who genuinely cares about me, she said finally. Then maybe you should listen to your heart instead of your fear. Maya's phone buzzed again. Another text from Alexander. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let me explain why I should have told you about Derek's promotion and why I didn't. Please. One conversation. Then if you want me to leave you alone, I will. Dolores glanced at the phone. What are you afraid of, honey? Getting hurt again. Making the same mistake twice. Being stupid enough to trust someone who doesn't really see me. And what are you afraid of if you don't go back? Maya considered this. Losing the first man who ever made me feel like I was enough exactly as I am. Sounds like you've got your answer. Maya looked at this stranger who had somehow helped her see clearly for the first time in hours. Thank you, Dolores. Thank me by fighting for something real instead of running from it. The world's got enough people settling for less than they deserve. Maya left a $20 tip and walked out into the night. The 6 blocks back to Alexander's building felt like the longest walk of her life, each step a choice between fear and courage, between safety and possibility. When she reached his door, her hand trembled as she knocked. Alexander answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting by the door. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and worry. You came back. I came back to talk, Maya said carefully. To hear your explanation. That doesn't mean anything else. I know. He stepped aside to let her in. Thank you for giving me the chance. Maya walked into the living room where this had all started, where she'd first felt safe after Derek's betrayal. The city sparkled beyond the windows, full of people making choices about love and trust and second chances. Tell me the truth, she said, turning to face him. All of it. And then I'll decide whether what we had was real or if I need to walk away from both you and Derek and start over completely alone. Alexander nodded, his face grave. The truth. All of it. I promise. And Maya sat down to hear whether her heart had been right to trust him, or if she was about to have it broken for the second time in 2 weeks. What do you think Alexander should say to convince Maya that his feelings are real? Sometimes the most important conversations happen when we're most afraid of the outcome. Have you ever had to choose between protecting your heart and fighting for love? Share your thoughts below. Alexander stood before Maya like a man facing judgment, his hands clasped behind his back, a gesture she'd learned meant he was fighting for control. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 2 weeks of careful trust and 1 afternoon of shattered faith. The truth, he said finally, his voice steady despite the tremor she could see in his jaw. About Derek's promotion, about why I helped you, about everything. Maya sat on the edge of his couch, her posture guarded. I'm listening. Derek Morrison has been on thin ice for months. Not because of his technical skills, those are adequate, but because of his character. He takes credit for other people's work, throws junior analysts under the bus when projects go wrong, and treats support staff like they're invisible. Alexander moved to the window, staring out at the city lights. 3 weeks before your wedding, he tried to blame a major calculation error on his assistant, a single mother who couldn't afford to lose her job. I had to choose between firing an innocent woman or demoting Derek. The decision to pass him over for promotion was made that day. Maya felt something ease in her chest. Before you met me. Long before. Alexander turned back to her, his eyes intense. Maya, I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, Derek's professional fate has nothing to do with you. The only reason it became relevant is because he tried to use it as a weapon. But you didn't tell me. No, I didn't. And I should have, the moment he made it an issue. Alexander sat across from her, careful to maintain distance. I told myself it wasn't relevant to us, that mixing business with personal would only complicate things. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of what? Scared that if you knew there was any professional connection, any complication, you'd convince yourself that my feelings weren't real. That you'd use it as an excuse to run before I could hurt you the way Derek did. Maya studied his face, looking for deception and finding only raw honesty. So you decided to lie by omission instead. Yes. And I was wrong. Alexander leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Maya, I have spent my entire adult life avoiding complications, managing variables, controlling outcomes. You are the first person who has ever made me want to throw caution to the wind and just feel. Then why didn't you trust me with the truth? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I've never had anything real to lose before. And the thought of losing you, losing this, terrified me more than any business deal or financial risk ever has. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. Alexander. I'm not finished. He stood abruptly, moving to his desk. You asked for the whole truth, and there's more. He returned with a manila folder, setting it on the coffee table between them. Maya stared at it, afraid to ask what it contained. Derek Morrison's personnel file, Alexander said. Everything HR has documented over the past 2 years. The complaints from colleagues, the incidents I mentioned, the pattern of behavior that made promoting him impossible. Maya's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Page after page of documented incidents. Derek undermining coworkers, Derek taking inappropriate credit, Derek making comments about female colleagues' appearances that bordered on harassment. At the bottom was a formal complaint dated 6 months ago from a junior analyst named Sarah Kim, describing how Derek had made her feel worthless and stupid for questioning one of his projections that later proved to be wrong. My God, Maya whispered. I never knew he was like this at work. People like Derek compartmentalize. They can be charming and attentive in personal relationships while being toxic professionally. Or vice versa. Alexander's voice was gentle. The man who made you feel special and the man who destroys his co-workers' confidence are the same person. You just saw different sides of him. Maya closed the folder, understanding flooding through her. This is why you were so angry in the parking garage. Why you looked at him like he was poison. I've seen what he does to people, Maya. Watching him do it to you, seeing you blame yourself for his cruelty, it made me want to destroy him. But you didn't. No. Because destroying Derek Morrison wouldn't undo the damage he'd done to you. Only showing you that you deserved better could do that. Maya stood, moving to the window where Alexander had stood moments before. The city stretched out below them, millions of lights representing millions of people making choices about love and trust and second chances. Dolores was right, she said softly. Who's Dolores? Maya turned back to him, a small smile tugging at her lips. A very wise waitress who helped me realize I was letting Derek's manipulation poison my judgment about you. Alexander took a cautious step closer. And what did you conclude? That you're a good man who made a mistake because you were scared of losing something precious. Maya moved toward him, closing the distance between them. That may be the reason you didn't tell me about Derek's promotion wasn't to manipulate me, but to protect something fragile that was growing between us. Maya. That maybe I've been so afraid of being naive again that I almost walked away from the first real love I've ever experienced. Alexander's breath caught. Love. Maya reached up, cupping his face in her hands. I love you, Alexander. I love your kindness and your protectiveness and even your terrible communication skills. I love the way you make me feel worthy of care and protection. I love that you see my value even when I can't see it myself. I love you too, he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. I love your strength and your compassion and your ability to trust again after being broken. I love that you make me want to be better than I am. You already are better than you think you are. When he kissed her this time, it tasted like forgiveness and new beginnings. Like two people who had found each other in the wreckage of their individual pain and decided to build something beautiful together. So what happens now? Maya asked when they broke apart. Now you move out of the guest room, Alexander said, his eyes twinkling with something that might have been mischief. Presumptuous, Mr. Blackwood. Practical, Ms. Chun. The master bedroom has a much better view. Maya laughed, the sound bright and free in the quiet apartment. I suppose I could be convinced to relocate. I have excellent negotiation skills. I'm sure you do. 6 months later, Maya stood in another wedding dress, this one chosen for her by a man who thought she was perfect exactly as she was. Alexander waited for her at the end of an aisle lined with friends who celebrated their love instead of questioning her worthiness of it. Derek Morrison had been transferred to the Seattle office after his demotion, a move that had surprised no one and relieved everyone. Maya occasionally wondered if he'd learned anything from his spectacular fall from grace, but mostly she was too busy being happy to spare him much thought. As she walked toward Alexander, radiant in ivory silk and genuine joy, Maya reflected on how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads directly to the best thing. Sometimes being broken open is the only way to let real love in. Alexander's eyes never left her face as she approached, his expression soft with wonder and devotion. When she reached him, he took her hands and whispered, "You're so beautiful." And for the first time in her life, Maya truly believed him. "Thank you," she whispered back, "for seeing me." "Thank you," he replied, "for letting me." They exchanged vows about choosing each other daily, about building trust through honesty, about being brave enough to love completely. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by everyone who mattered and blessed by a love that had transformed them both. As they walked back down the aisle together, Maya caught sight of Dolores in the third row, the wise waitress who had helped her choose courage over fear, invited as an honored guest to celebrate the love she'd helped save. "Ready for our honeymoon, Mrs. Blackwood?" Alexander murmured as they reached the back of the church. "Ready for everything," Maya replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Because sometimes fairy tales are real. Sometimes the prince finds you when you're broken and helps you remember you are always worthy of love. Sometimes the worst day of your life leads directly to the best life you could ever imagine. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, love really does conquer all.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.